My name is Elena Voss, and I was 28 years old when my mother's text message shattered what should have been the happiest week of my life. I was at the florist finalizing my wedding bouquet when my phone buzzed with a message that read, "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the venue. Your father and I have given Rosewood Manor to Isabelle. She needs it more than you do. I'm sure you'll understand." The words blurred as I read them twice, then 3 times, each repetition making them more incomprehensible rather than clearer. Rosewood Manor, the historic estate where I'd dreamed of getting married since I was 16, the venue my parents had promised to gift me, the reservation they'd made in my name 2 years ago, had been handed to my younger sister with 4 days' notice. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 6 years building something they'd never bothered to ask about, and I was about to make one phone call that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the eldest daughter in the Voss family meant living in a house where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where social standing trumped personal happiness, and where your value was measured by how well you reflected the family image. Our home in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a sprawling Tudor revival with manicured gardens that required 3 groundskeepers and an interior that looked like it had been lifted from an architectural magazine spread. My mother, Patricia Voss, came from old Connecticut money, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted, expressed through country club memberships and charity galas rather than flashy cars or designer labels. My father, Richard Voss, had built his fortune in commercial real estate development, transforming struggling properties into luxury complexes that dotted the northeastern seaboard. Together, they formed a power couple whose dinner parties were attended by state senators, whose charity foundation was photographed for society pages, and whose children were expected to be living accessories to their carefully curated image. My younger sister Isabelle was born 18 months after me, and from the moment she arrived, something shifted in the family dynamic that I was too young to understand but old enough to feel. Where I was practical and studious, Isabelle was charming and social. Where I preferred books and quiet corners, Isabelle thrived in crowds and attention. My mother would dress us in matching outfits for family photos, but even then, the difference was apparent. Isabelle would pose naturally, her smile bright and effortless, while I stood stiffly, uncomfortable with the performance aspect of family life. As we grew older, these differences became more pronounced and more valued by our parents. Isabelle inherited our mother's social grace and our father's charisma, a combination that made her the natural star of every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every event where the Voss family needed to shine. I wasn't unattractive or socially inept, but I was different in ways that didn't fit the family mold. I asked too many questions, challenged assumptions, and worst of all, I was interested in things that couldn't be displayed or bragged about at cocktail parties. While Isabelle took ballet and piano lessons that culminated in recitals my parents could attend and photograph, I became obsessed with how things worked, spending hours taking apart old radios and computers, teaching myself basic coding from library books, fascinated by systems and logic and problem solving. My father would sometimes find me in the garage, surrounded by the guts of some electronic device, and shake his head with bemused frustration. "Elena, why can't you take up something normal? Something we can actually talk about with our friends?" The implication was clear. My interests were embarrassing, too technical, too masculine, too weird for a Voss daughter. School became my refuge and my battleground. I excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and sciences, subjects that came naturally to me in ways that social performance never would. My teachers praised my analytical mind and problem-solving abilities, but at home, these achievements were met with tepid acknowledgement at best. When I won the regional mathematics competition in 10th grade, my mother's response was to ask if there would be a ceremony she and my father could attend. When I explained it was just a certificate mailed to the school, her interest evaporated immediately. "Oh, well, that's nice, dear," she'd said, turning back to help Isabelle prepare for her role in the school musical, an event that required costume fittings and multiple rehearsals that my mother attended religiously, taking dozens of photos to share with friends. The pattern established itself firmly during our high school years. Isabelle joined the cheerleading squad, dated the captain of the lacrosse team, and was elected to homecoming court, achievements that my parents celebrated with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Olympic victories. She had inherited our mother's delicate features and blonde hair, combined with a natural charisma that drew people to her effortlessly. Teachers loved her, peers admired her, and our parents beamed with pride whenever she entered a room. Meanwhile, I spent my free time in the computer lab, building websites for local businesses to earn money, learning programming languages from online tutorials, and developing skills that seemed invisible to everyone in my immediate orbit. When college applications rolled around, the contrast between my path and Isabelle's became even more stark. Isabelle applied to schools known for their social scenes and strong alumni networks, places where connections mattered as much as coursework. She wanted to study communications or maybe marketing, fields that would leverage her natural people skills and charm. My parents were thrilled with her choices, already envisioning the networking opportunities and social events they'd attend as her parents. For me, the decision was more complicated and contentious. I wanted to study computer science and information systems at MIT, drawn to their reputation for technical innovation and the opportunity to work with the best minds in technology. When I shared this dream at dinner one evening during my senior year, the reaction was less than enthusiastic. MIT, my mother repeated, as if I'd suggested attending school on Mars. Elena, that's so far away, and it's so technical. Don't you want something more well-rounded? Maybe something closer to home? My father cleared his throat, preparing to deliver what he clearly considered reasonable advice. Your mother's right. MIT is very specialized. What about Yale or Princeton? They have excellent computer science programs, but you'd also get a broader education. More importantly, they have the kind of name recognition that matters in our circles. The subtext was obvious. MIT was too nerdy, too focused, too outside the social sphere my parents valued. Yale or Princeton would give me a technical education while maintaining the prestigious, well-rounded image they preferred for their daughters. But I was stubborn, a Voss trait that apparently only counted as an asset when Isabelle deployed it to get her way. I applied to MIT as my first choice and was accepted with a partial scholarship based on my academic record and a portfolio of coding projects I'd completed independently. The acceptance letter should have been cause for celebration, but the response from my parents was muted at best. We're proud of you, of course, my mother said carefully, holding the letter as if it might bite her. But have you really thought this through? Boston is quite far, and you'll miss so many family events. And honestly, sweetheart, we were hoping you might consider something that would help you meet more people, develop your social skills a bit more. The words stung because they confirmed what I'd always suspected. In my parents' eyes, I was the daughter who needed fixing, who needed to be more like Isabelle, more socially polished and less intensely focused on technical pursuits. I accepted MIT's offer despite their reservations, watching as they threw Isabelle an elaborate high school graduation party with 100 guests while my own graduation was celebrated with a small family dinner. The contrast wasn't lost on me, but I told myself it didn't matter. I was going to one of the best technical schools in the world, pursuing something I was genuinely passionate about, and I didn't need my parents' enthusiastic approval to validate that choice. What I didn't realize then was how this pattern would continue and deepen over the following years, establishing a family dynamic where Isabelle's needs and desires would consistently take precedence over mine, where her milestones would be celebrated with fanfare while mine would be acknowledged with obligatory politeness. College was transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. At MIT, I found my people, fellow students who spoke in code and algorithms, who understood the elegance of a well-designed system, who stayed up until 3 a.m. debugging programs not because they had to but because they wanted to solve the puzzle. I thrived in that environment, my grades placing me in the top 10% of my class, my projects catching the attention of professors who saw potential in my work. During my sophomore year, I joined a research lab focused on network security and data systems, working alongside graduate students on projects that had real-world applications. The lead professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, became an unexpected mentor, someone who valued my analytical mind and encouraged me to think beyond traditional applications of technology. It was Dr. Chen who first suggested I consider event technology and management systems as a specialization. You have a rare combination of technical skill and understanding of human systems, she told me during one of our lab meetings. Most programmers can build great systems, but they don't understand the human element, the workflow, the practical application in complex environments. You see both sides. She introduced me to a colleague who ran a small startup focused on building management software for large-scale events, everything from corporate conferences to weddings. I started working there part-time during my junior year, fascinated by how technology could streamline complex operations, coordinate multiple vendors, manage guest experiences, and solve logistical nightmares that event planners face daily. By my senior year, I had developed such expertise in event technology systems that I was consulting for several major event planning companies in the Boston area, helping them implement software solutions that revolutionized how they managed everything from vendor contracts to guest lists to day of coordination. The work was lucrative enough that I was able to pay off my student loans and start saving money, a financial independence that felt empowering after years of relying on my parents' support. When I graduated with honors and multiple job offers from tech companies, my parents attended the ceremony but seemed more interested in the social aspects than my actual achievements. "It's such a large graduation," my mother commented. "Not very personal like Isabelle's will be at Dartmouth." Even my graduation had to be compared unfavorably to my sister's future milestone. I accepted a position at TechFlow Solutions, a rapidly growing company that specialized in enterprise-level event management software. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Building systems for Fortune 500 companies, international conferences, and high-profile events. My role was officially titled Senior Systems Architect, which meant I designed and built the technical infrastructure that powered events for some of the biggest names in business and entertainment. The work was challenging and fulfilling, combining my technical skills with an understanding of complex logistical needs. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted twice and was leading a team of developers building next-generation event platforms. My salary had grown to a level that surprised even me, well into 6 figures with stock options that would vest over time. But here's what made my situation particularly ironic. Despite working in event technology, despite literally building the systems that powered some of the world's most elaborate celebrations, my family had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living. When relatives asked about my career at family gatherings, my mother would wave vaguely and say something like, "Oh, Elena works with computers. Very technical, you know." My father would add, "She does something with events and technology. Honestly, I don't fully understand it, but she seems to enjoy it." Neither of them had ever asked for details, never toured my office, never expressed curiosity about the projects I worked on or the clients I served. In their minds, I had a respectable job that paid well enough, but it wasn't something they could easily explain or brag about at their social functions, so it remained largely invisible to them. The contrast with how they discussed Isabelle's career was stark and painful. After graduating from Dartmouth with a degree in communications, Isabelle had moved back to Connecticut and taken a position in public relations at a boutique firm that handled clients in fashion and lifestyle brands. It was the kind of job that sounded impressive at cocktail parties, that involved attending launch events and gallery openings, that generated Instagram-worthy photos my mother could share with her friends. "Isabelle is doing so well," my mother would tell anyone who would listen. "She's working with the most amazing clients, real tastemakers in the fashion world. Just last week, she coordinated a product launch for a designer handbag line. The event was featured in Vogue." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, the exact tone that was absent when she mentioned my own significantly more lucrative and impactful career. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself that I didn't need their validation, that my success spoke for itself even if they couldn't see it. But the hurt accumulated over years like sediment, building up in layers until it became something heavy and unmovable. The pattern repeated itself at every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every occasion where relatives asked about our lives. Isabelle's stories about celebrity clients and fashion events would dominate the conversation, while my attempts to share anything about my work would be met with polite disinterest and glazed expressions. "That sounds very technical," my aunt would say kindly before turning to Isabelle to ask about her latest project. I learned to stop trying, to keep my professional life separate from my family life, to exist in 2 different worlds that never quite connected. It was during this period of growing disconnection from my family that I met Daniel. We crossed paths at a technology conference where his architecture firm was looking to implement new project management systems and my company was presenting our latest software solutions. Daniel Torres was 31, a licensed architect with his own small but successful firm that specialized in sustainable residential design. He had warm brown eyes, an easy laugh, and a genuine interest in my work that felt revolutionary after years of family indifference. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, starting with technical questions about system integration and evolving into discussions about design philosophy, the intersection of technology and human experience, and our shared love of problem solving. What drew me to Daniel wasn't just his professional success or his handsome features, though both were certainly appealing. It was the way he listened when I talked about my work, asking follow-up questions that showed he was actually trying to understand, sharing his own challenges in ways that created real dialogue rather than competitive one-upmanship. He came from a large Mexican-American family in New Jersey where success was celebrated loudly and affectionately, where achievements were shared accomplishments rather than fodder for comparison. His parents ran a small restaurant that had been in the family for 3 generations. His siblings included a teacher, a nurse, and a mechanic, and every single one of them was treated as equally valuable and important. The contrast to my own family dynamic was striking. We dated for 2 years before Daniel proposed, and they were the happiest 2 years of my life. He integrated seamlessly into my life in Boston, supporting my career ambitions, celebrating my promotions, attending company events where he charmed my colleagues with his genuine interest in their work. His family welcomed me with open arms, treating me like I'd always been part of their loud, warm, chaotic clan. His mother taught me family recipes, his father told embarrassing stories about Daniel's childhood, and his siblings included me in their group texts and inside jokes without hesitation. Being part of the Torres family showed me what unconditional acceptance felt like, how it felt to be valued for who you were rather than how you reflected on the family image. Introducing Daniel to my own family was a more complicated affair. I brought him home for Thanksgiving during our first year together, nervous about how my parents would receive him. Daniel was successful and educated, running his own firm and earning a comfortable living, but his background was different from the old money Connecticut world my parents inhabited. His parents were immigrants who'd built their business from nothing, his success was first generation, and his warm, expressive personality was miles away from the reserved formality my family prized. The dinner was polite but strained, my mother asking carefully worded questions about his family that barely masked her concern about class differences, my father discussing real estate in a way that subtly emphasized his own larger scale of operations. But the real tension came from Isabelle, who had recently started dating Preston Whitmore, the son of one of Connecticut's most prominent families. Preston's grandfather had been a senator, his father ran an investment firm, and their name appeared on buildings and scholarships throughout the state. At that Thanksgiving dinner, my parents couldn't stop talking about Preston's pedigree, his family's connections, the opportunities his relationship with Isabelle would open up for all of them. Preston's father was saying that he could introduce you to some potential clients, my father told Isabelle, barely containing his excitement. The Whitmore network is extraordinary. Meanwhile, Daniel's perfectly respectable architectural practice and his family's successful restaurant were treated as pleasant but unremarkable background details, interesting in an anthropological way but not something to celebrate. When Daniel proposed on a beach in Maine during a weekend getaway, it was perfect and intimate and everything I wanted. He designed a custom ring himself, incorporating elements that represented our relationship and my interests, a level of thoughtfulness that made me cry with happiness. We called our families immediately after I said yes, and the responses were characteristically different. Daniel's family erupted with joy, his mother immediately asking when she could start planning the engagement party, his siblings flooding our phones with congratulatory texts and terrible wedding puns. My parents' response was more measured. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said, her tone pleasant but not effusive. "Have you set a date? We'll need quite a bit of time to plan properly." My father's main concern was whether Daniel had asked his permission first, a traditional gesture that Daniel hadn't thought to do because, as he later told me, he was marrying me, not my father. The engagement period that followed was a masterclass in family dynamics and priorities. Daniel and I wanted a relatively simple wedding, meaningful and beautiful but not ostentatious. We started looking at venues in the Boston area, places that reflected our style and values. But my mother had other ideas. "You simply must have the wedding in Connecticut," she insisted during one of our planning calls. "All our friends and family are here, and besides, there are so many better venues than anything you'll find in Boston." When I tried to explain that Boston was where Daniel and I lived and worked, where our friends were, she dismissed it with a wave I could practically feel through the phone. "Your wedding is about family, Elena. Don't be selfish about this." The venue debate became a point of ongoing tension until my mother proposed what seemed like a compromise. "What about Rosewood Manor?" she suggested. "You've always loved that place, and your father and I know the owners. We could book it for you, our gift to you and Daniel." Rosewood Manor was a historic estate about 40 minutes from my parents' house, a stunning property with manicured gardens, a grand ballroom, and a romantic atmosphere that had captured my imagination since I was a teenager. My mother had taken me there for a charity luncheon when I was 16, and I'd spent the entire event imagining what it would be like to have a wedding in such a beautiful setting. The fact that my mother remembered this detail, that she was offering to secure and pay for such a prestigious venue, felt like an unexpected gesture of support and connection. Daniel and I visited Rosewood Manor together, and it exceeded even my nostalgic memories. The gardens were spectacular, the ballroom was elegant without being stuffy, and the coordinator assured us they could accommodate our vision for a ceremony that felt personal and meaningful. The cost was astronomical, well beyond what Daniel and I would have considered spending on our own, but my parents insisted it was their contribution to our wedding. "Every girl should have her dream wedding," my mother said, sounding more supportive than she had about any of my choices in years. "Consider this our way of celebrating you and Daniel." We booked Rosewood Manor for a Saturday in June, 18 months in the future, giving us plenty of time to plan without rushing. For the next year, wedding planning proceeded smoothly enough, though with my typical family complications. I was managing a major software rollout at work, Daniel's firm was in the middle of several significant projects, and we were trying to plan a wedding while living 3 hours from the venue. My mother appointed herself as the primary coordinator on the Connecticut end, which I initially appreciated since it meant less travel for me. But her involvement came with strings attached. She had opinions about everything from the color scheme to the guest list to the catering choices, opinions that increasingly overrode my own preferences. When I suggested a menu that included some of Daniel's family's Mexican cuisine, she vetoed it as too ethnic for the venue. When I wanted succulents and wildflowers for the centerpieces, she insisted on traditional roses and peonies. Every decision became a negotiation where my preferences were weighed against what would look appropriate, what her friends would expect, what fit the image she wanted to project. Isabelle's involvement in my wedding planning was sporadic at best. She'd attended my engagement party and my bridal shower, both events my mother had organized with military precision, but her interest in my actual wedding seemed minimal. She was busy with her own life, her relationship with Preston growing more serious, and my upcoming nuptials were apparently not compelling enough to command her full attention. I tried not to feel hurt by her disinterest, reminding myself that we'd grown apart over the years, that our different paths had created distance that was probably natural for siblings who'd never been particularly close. But there was a small part of me that had hoped planning my wedding might be something that brought us together, a chance to connect as adults in ways we never had as children. Then, 6 months before my wedding date, Isabelle and Preston got engaged. The announcement came at a family dinner, with Preston formally asking my father for Isabelle's hand in a traditional gesture that made my parents beam with pride. The ring was enormous, a family heirloom from the Whitmore collection, and my mother actually cried with joy as she hugged Isabelle. The rest of the evening was consumed with excited planning talk, my mother immediately pulling out her phone to start coordinating engagement parties and discussing potential wedding dates. "You'll want at least a year to plan properly," my mother told Isabelle. Something truly spectacular worthy of both families. The implication that my own wedding, scheduled 6 months away, wasn't spectacular enough hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. What happened over the following months was a gradual but definite shift in family energy and attention. Isabelle and Preston's engagement became the primary topic of every family gathering, every phone call, every interaction. My mother was constantly researching venues for Isabelle, sending her photos of potential locations, discussing guest lists that would number in the hundreds to accommodate both families' extensive social networks. My father was equally invested, seeing the union as a merging of two prominent families that would elevate the Voss name even further in Connecticut social circles. Meanwhile, my own wedding, which had been planned and booked for over a year, increasingly became an afterthought, something that would happen first but was somehow less important than the major event to follow. I tried to maintain my own momentum with wedding planning, but it was like pushing a boulder uphill. My mother would forget scheduled planning meetings because she was helping Isabelle look at venues. Conversations about my wedding would somehow always pivot to questions about Isabelle's plans. "Have you seen the Whitmore estate?" my mother would ask in the middle of discussing my floral arrangements. "Absolutely breathtaking. Isabelle might have her ceremony there. Can you imagine?" The message was clear. My wedding at Rosewood Manor was nice, but Isabelle's future wedding would be the real event, the one that truly mattered. The final months before my wedding were a blur of work projects, vendor confirmations, and increasingly strained calls with my mother about last-minute details. Daniel's family had stepped up significantly, his mother helping with DIY decorations when my mother was too busy, his sisters throwing me a beautiful bridal shower that felt more personal than the formal affair my mother had organized months earlier. They'd embraced me fully, treating my wedding as a celebration that mattered, that deserved attention and care. The contrast to my own family's growing disinterest was painful but also clarifying. I was building a new family with Daniel, one where I would be valued and celebrated, and that had to be enough. Then came the week of my wedding, 4 days before Daniel and I were supposed to get married at Rosewood Manor. I had taken the week off work to handle final preparations, tie up loose ends, and hopefully relax a bit before the big day. Daniel was wrapping up projects at his firm so he could take 2 weeks off for our wedding and honeymoon in Portugal. We were excited, nervous, happy, exhausted, feeling all the emotions that come with preparing for a major life milestone. I'd driven down to Connecticut on Monday to coordinate with vendors, confirm final details with the venue, and spend a few days with my family before the ceremony. On Wednesday morning, I had an appointment at the florist to finalize the bouquet arrangements and confirm delivery times. I was standing in the florist shop, examining samples of the wildflower bouquets I'd finally convinced my mother to accept as a compromise, when my phone buzzed with a text message from her. The message was casual, almost breezy in its tone, as if she were discussing dinner plans rather than dropping a bomb that would shatter my entire world. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the venue. Your father and I have given Rosewood Manor to Isabelle. She needs it more than you do. I'm sure you'll understand." I read the message once, then again, then a third time, each reading making the words less comprehensible rather than more clear. The florist asked me a question about ribbon colors that I couldn't process, my mind completely frozen on the impossible statement in my mother's text. I excused myself from the florist, walking out onto the sidewalk in a daze, my phone clutched in my hand like it might suddenly transform the message into something that made sense. My first instinct was to call my mother immediately, to demand an explanation, to scream that she couldn't possibly be serious. But something stopped me, some instinct that told me to gather more information before reacting. Instead, I called Daniel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "Elena? What's wrong?" Daniel's voice was immediately concerned, picking up on my distress through the phone. I tried to speak but found my throat constricted, the words trapped behind a wall of shock and disbelief. "Baby, talk to me. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" His alarm was escalating, and I forced myself to take a breath and find my voice. "My mother just texted me," I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "She says they've given Rosewood Manor to Isabelle. 4 days before our wedding, Daniel." 4 days. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds, and I could almost hear Daniel processing this information, trying to make it make sense. "What do you mean, given it to Isabelle? Like, for her future wedding? They can transfer the booking or something?" His confusion matched my own initial reaction, both of us grasping for any interpretation that wasn't the obvious, devastating one. "I don't know," I said, reading the text again for the 4th time. "She says Isabelle needs it more than I do. That I'll understand." A bitter laugh escaped me, sounding harsh and unfamiliar. "Understand what exactly?" "That 4 days before I'm supposed to get married, my venue no longer exists." Daniel was quiet for another moment, and when he spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I'm coming to Connecticut right now. Don't do anything until I get there. Don't talk to your mother, don't make any decisions. Just wait for me, okay?" His protective instinct was kicking in, his desire to shield me from this catastrophe even though we both knew he couldn't undo what had already been done. "You can't drop everything and drive 3 hours, I protested weakly, even though I desperately wanted him there. "You have that client meeting this afternoon, and the structural review tomorrow morning. Elena, our wedding venue just disappeared 4 days before our wedding. I'm coming." His tone left no room for argument. "I'll reschedule everything. Just tell me where you are, and I'll meet you there." I gave him the address of a coffee shop near the florist, somewhere neutral where I could wait and try to process what was happening. I ordered coffee I couldn't drink and sat in a corner booth, staring at my phone and trying to piece together what could possibly have led to this moment. The venue had been booked for 18 months. The deposit had been paid, the contract signed, the final payment processed just 2 weeks ago. Rosewood Manor had confirmed everything multiple times, sent detailed timelines for the wedding day, coordinated with our vendors. How could any of this simply be given to someone else? And more importantly, how could my mother think this was acceptable? Even by the standards of our dysfunctional family dynamic, this seemed beyond the pale, a betrayal so profound I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My phone rang with my mother's ringtone, and I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I got your text. I need you to explain what's happening." "Oh good, I'm glad you saw it," my mother replied, her tone bright and casual as if we were discussing a minor schedule change. "I wanted to talk to you about this in person, but you know how busy things have been. Isabelle and Preston have moved up their wedding date. They want to get married this fall, and you know how difficult it is to find a good venue on short notice. So you gave them mine," I stated flatly, still struggling to believe this was a real conversation I was having. "For days before my wedding, you took my venue and gave it to Isabelle." "Don't be dramatic, Elena," my mother sighed, using the same tone she'd employed throughout my childhood when I questioned family decisions. "We didn't take anything from you. We're simply redirecting resources where they're needed most. Isabelle's wedding is going to be much larger than yours, with many more important guests. The Whitmore family expects a certain standard, and Rosewood Manor is perfect for what they have in mind." The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing with precision. "I've had Rosewood Manor booked for 18 months, Mom. 18 months of planning, vendor coordination, guest travel arrangements. Our wedding is in 4 days. Which is why I'm sure you can find an alternative quite easily," my mother continued, her logic somehow making sense in whatever alternate reality she inhabited. "You work in event planning or technology or whatever it is. Surely you have contacts who can help you relocate. Isabelle doesn't have those kinds of resources. She needs our help more than you do." I closed my eyes, trying to control the rage that was building beneath the shock. "I don't work in event planning, Mom. I design software for event management. That's not the same thing as being able to magically produce a wedding venue 4 days before a ceremony." "Well, you'll figure something out," she said with maddening confidence in my ability to fix the disaster she'd created. "You've always been so resourceful, so independent. Isabelle needs more support, more guidance. You understand that, don't you? You've never needed us the way she does." The statement was so revealing, so perfectly encapsulating our entire family dynamic, that I almost laughed. I'd never needed them because they'd never been there for me, and they'd never been there for me because I didn't need them in the specific ways they wanted to be needed. It was a circular logic that had defined my entire relationship with my parents, and now it had culminated in this ultimate act of dismissal. "What about the guests?" I asked, grasping for any angle that might make her see reason. "Daniel and I have 150 people traveling to Connecticut this weekend. They've booked hotels, arranged time off work, bought plane tickets. What are we supposed to tell them?" "I'm sure most of them can adjust their plans," my mother said breezily. "Young people are flexible these days. And honestly, Elena, 150 guests is quite modest for a Voss family wedding. Isabelle and Preston are expecting over 300. You see why Rosewood Manor makes more sense for their needs." I sat in stunned silence, realizing that there was no argument I could make that would penetrate my mother's reasoning. In her mind, she'd made a perfectly logical decision, prioritizing the more important wedding over the less significant one. The fact that my wedding was happening first, that contracts and commitments and people's lives had been organized around it, was apparently irrelevant compared to the social importance of Isabelle's union with the Whitmore family. "Does Isabelle know you did this?" I asked, needing to understand if my sister was complicit in this betrayal or simply the beneficiary of our mother's twisted priorities. There was a brief pause before my mother answered. "Of course, she knows." She felt terrible about the timing, but she also understands that sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good of the family. She knew you'd be understanding once you thought about it rationally. The fact that Isabelle had known, had allowed this to happen, had agreed to take my venue 4 days before my wedding, felt like a separate wound layered on top of the initial injury. Whatever relationship we still had, whatever sisterly bond might have survived our different paths and our parents' favoritism, had just been irrevocably severed. "I have to go," I said abruptly, unable to continue the conversation without saying things that couldn't be unsaid. "Daniel's waiting for me." "Elena, don't overreact to this," my mother warned, using the phrase she'd employed countless times throughout my life whenever I objected to something unreasonable. "We can discuss alternative venues for you. Maybe something smaller, more intimate. It might actually be better suited to what you and Daniel wanted anyway." I ended the call without responding, my hands trembling with rage and hurt and a bitter vindication that all my years of feeling undervalued hadn't been paranoia or oversensitivity. My family really did see me as less important, less worthy of consideration, disposable in ways that Isabelle would never be. The difference was that now they'd made it explicit, undeniable, documented in a casual text message and a phone call where my mother genuinely couldn't understand why I wasn't being more accommodating. Daniel arrived 2 hours later, bursting into the coffee shop with the kind of protective fury that would have been comforting if the situation weren't so catastrophically beyond fixing. He pulled me into a hug that I sank into gratefully, finally allowing myself to cry now that he was there to witness my breakdown. We sat in that corner booth for another hour while I recounted the entire conversation with my mother, watching his expression shift from disbelief to anger to a kind of grim determination. "We're going to fix this," he said finally, his jaw set in a way I recognized from when he was solving a particularly difficult design problem. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to have our wedding this weekend, and it's going to be exactly what we wanted." "Daniel, there's no way," I said, exhausted from crying and shock. "Every decent venue is booked months or years in advance. We have 4 days. It's impossible." "You work in event technology," he reminded me, echoing my mother's words but with entirely different intent. "You've built systems for managing some of the biggest events in the country. You have professional connections, industry knowledge, technical expertise that most people don't have. If anyone can pull off a miracle, it's you." His confidence in me was touching but felt misplaced given the reality of the situation. "Those systems I build are for planning events with months of lead time, not throwing together a wedding in 4 days. And my professional contacts are mostly in corporate events, not weddings. I don't have some magic Rolodex of available venues just waiting for last-minute bookings." Daniel pulled out his phone and opened a notes app, starting to make a list with the methodical approach he brought to architectural challenges. "Okay, let's think about this systematically. What do we actually need for a wedding? A space that can hold 150 people, someone to officiate, food, music, flowers. Everything else is optional, right?" I appreciated his attempt to problem solve, but the magnitude of coordinating all those elements in 4 days felt overwhelming. "In theory, yes. In practice, every single vendor we've booked has been arranged through Rosewood Manor's preferred partners. The caterer, the florist, the photographer, the DJ. They're all expecting to work at that specific venue. We'd have to not only find a new location but also coordinate with all those vendors about the change, assuming they can even work at a different venue. Can they refuse?" Daniel asked, his architectural mind looking for the structural constraints of the problem. "We have contracts with them, right? They're obligated to provide services for our wedding date regardless of location?" I thought about the various vendor contracts I'd signed over the past year, trying to remember the specific terms. Most of them have location-specific clauses. The caterer's contract, for instance, is based on using Rosewood Manor's kitchen facilities. The florist's arrangement includes decorating the specific spaces at the venue. If we change locations, we'd technically be changing the scope of their contracts, which probably gives them grounds to renegotiate or potentially back out. So we might lose our vendors too, Daniel said, adding that to his mental list of catastrophes. What about your parents' financial contribution? They were paying for the venue. Do they owe us that money to put toward an alternative? It was a practical question, but it made me realize another layer of the problem. They were paying the venue directly. The contract for Rosewood Manor was in their name, with me listed as the client. I'd have to ask if they're willing to transfer that money toward a different venue, and based on my mother's attitude, I'm guessing the answer is no. Daniel's expression darkened. So they're not only taking away your venue but also the financial resources to replace it. That's beyond unacceptable, Elena. That's deliberately sabotaging our wedding. I don't think my mother sees it that way, I said, feeling a strange need to explain her logic even though I was furious with her. In her mind, she's redirecting resources to where they're most needed. Isabelle's wedding is more important, therefore Isabelle gets the better venue and the financial support. I'm supposed to understand and accommodate because I'm the responsible one who can handle adversity. That's not how families work, Daniel said, his voice tight with anger. That's not how any of this works. You don't steal someone's wedding venue 4 days before their ceremony because you've decided their sister's future wedding is more important. That's insane. He wasn't wrong, but the insanity was rooted in years of family dynamics that would take hours to fully explain. My mother genuinely believed she was making a reasonable decision because in the carefully constructed hierarchy of our family, Isabelle's needs had always trumped mine. This was just the most extreme and damaging manifestation of a pattern that had been established long ago. We need to go to your parents' house, Daniel said, standing up with sudden determination. We need to have this conversation in person, with your father present too. Maybe if they see how serious this is, they'll reconsider. I doubted it would make any difference, but I didn't have a better plan. We drove to my parents' house in Greenwich, the familiar tree-lined streets and manicured lawns feeling surreal given the crisis at hand. Daniel parked in the circular driveway, and we sat for a moment looking at the imposing facade of the house I'd grown up in. Ready? He asked, squeezing my hand. Not even slightly, I replied, but I got out of the car anyway. We rang the doorbell rather than using my key, a small act of formality that felt appropriate given the circumstances. My mother answered, her expression shifting from surprise to forced cheerfulness when she saw us. Elena, Daniel, what a surprise. I wasn't expecting you until the rehearsal dinner Friday. Come in, come in. She stepped back to allow us entry, and we followed her into the formal living room where my father was reading on his tablet. He looked up with mild curiosity at our unexpected arrival. Richard, look who's here, my mother announced brightly. Elena and Daniel decided to drop by for a visit. My father set down his tablet and stood to greet us, shaking Daniel's hand with the formal courtesy he extended to business associates. Good to see you both. Everything all right with the wedding preparations? The question was so absurd given the circumstances that I almost laughed. Actually, no, Dad. Everything is not all right. Mom told me this morning that you've given Rosewood Manor to Isabelle for her wedding. Our wedding is in 4 days, and we no longer have a venue. My father's expression shifted from polite interest to uncomfortable awareness, and I realized immediately that this decision had been my mother's doing, possibly without his full knowledge or consent. Patricia, I thought you were going to discuss alternative options with Elena before making any final decisions about the venue. I sent her a text this morning, my mother said defensively. I explained the situation clearly. Isabelle needs Rosewood Manor for her wedding, and Elena has the skills and resources to find an alternative. It's a simple matter of reallocating resources to where they're most needed. For days before the wedding is not simple, Daniel interjected, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. We have 150 guests traveling here this weekend. We have vendors booked, contracts signed, a honeymoon scheduled. You can't just take away the venue and expect us to figure it out with no notice and no support. My mother waved her hand dismissively. You're both being overdramatic. Weddings happen all the time with much less planning. You'll find somewhere suitable, I'm sure. Besides, Elena works in events. She should be able to pull some strings, call in some favors. I design event management software, I said through gritted teeth. I don't personally manage events or have access to venues. That's not how any of this works. And even if I did, 4 days is not enough time to book a venue, relocate vendors, and notify guests of a complete change in location. My father cleared his throat, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should have discussed this more thoroughly as a family before making any commitments to Isabelle. The timing is certainly unfortunate. Unfortunate? I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Dad, this isn't unfortunate. This is devastating. This is my wedding, which I've been planning for 18 months, being completely destroyed so that Isabelle can have what she wants on her timeline. Don't be so dramatic, Elena, my mother sighed. You're acting like we've committed some terrible crime. We're simply helping your sister during a difficult time. Preston's family wants the wedding sooner rather than later, and Isabelle was in tears about not being able to find a suitable venue. What were we supposed to do, tell her no when we had a perfectly good venue sitting there? Yes, Daniel and I said simultaneously. He continued, his anger barely contained. You were supposed to tell her no because that venue was already being used for another wedding. Your other daughter's wedding, which happens to be occurring first. My mother's expression hardened. I don't appreciate your tone, Daniel. This is a family matter, and frankly, it's not your place to criticize how we choose to support our daughters. It became my place when you sabotaged my wedding, Daniel shot back. And I'm starting to understand why Elena has always felt like an afterthought in this family. This is unbelievable. I think we should all take a breath and discuss this rationally, my father attempted, trying to restore some order to the rapidly deteriorating conversation. Patricia, perhaps we could offer Elena and Daniel financial compensation equivalent to what we would have paid for Rosewood Manor. They could use those funds toward an alternative venue. It was the first reasonable suggestion anyone had made, but my mother's response quickly shut down that possibility. We've already transferred those funds to Rosewood Manor for Isabelle's wedding. The contract has been modified to reflect the new date and client. The money is committed. I stared at my mother, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd done. She hadn't just given away my venue on a whim. She'd actively transferred the financial contract, modified agreements, and committed resources to Isabelle's wedding, all without consulting me or considering the consequences. This wasn't a thoughtless mistake. It was a deliberate choice, executed with planning and intention. When did you do this? I asked quietly. When did you actually make these changes with Rosewood Manor? My mother shifted uncomfortably. Last week. Isabelle and Preston finalized their decision to move up the wedding date, and we acted quickly to secure the venue before someone else could book it. Last week, I repeated, my voice hollow. You've known for a week that you were taking my venue, and you told me via text message this morning, for days before my wedding. I was trying to find the right time to bring it up, my mother defended. These situations are delicate. I didn't want to upset you unnecessarily. Unnecessarily, Daniel said, his voice dripping with disbelief. You stole your daughter's wedding venue and you thought there was a way to present that information that wouldn't be upsetting? The conversation continued to spiral, arguments and justifications flying back and forth with no resolution in sight. My father remained largely silent, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict my mother or force any real change. It became increasingly clear that no amount of reasoning or pleading would result in them returning Rosewood Manor to me. The decision had been made, the contracts modified, and in my mother's mind, there was nothing to discuss. Finally, I stood up, exhausted and defeated. I think we should go, I said to Daniel. This conversation isn't productive. Elena, don't leave angry, my mother called as we headed toward the door. We can work together to find you a lovely alternative venue. I'm sure there are plenty of options that would be perfectly suitable for a small, intimate wedding. I turned back to face her, and something in my expression must have conveyed the depth of my hurt and anger because she actually took a step back. I don't want your help finding an alternative, I said coldly. You've made your priorities clear. Enjoy Isabelle's wedding at my venue. I'm sure it will be exactly the kind of spectacular event you've always wanted. We left before anyone could respond, climbing back into Daniel's car in silence. As we pulled out of the driveway, I felt my phone buzz with a text message. It was from Isabelle. Elena, I'm so sorry about the venue situation. I didn't want this to happen like this, but Mom said you'd understand. You're always so good at adapting. Please don't be mad. We're still sisters. The message was simultaneously an apology and an abdication of responsibility, acknowledging the problem while refusing to do anything to fix it. I showed it to Daniel, who read it and shook his head in disgust. Is she serious? She thinks a text message apology makes up for taking your wedding venue? She thinks I'm supposed to understand and accommodate, I said, echoing my mother's words. That's always been my role in this family. Be understanding, be flexible, be the one who adapts so that Isabelle can have what she wants. Daniel drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking again. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to prove that you don't need them or their venue or their support. We're going to have the wedding we wanted, this weekend as planned, and it's going to be perfect. And then they're going to realize what they threw away. His confidence was touching but felt disconnected from reality. Daniel, I love you for believing that, but there's no way to pull together a wedding in 4 days. It's literally impossible. 4 days is 96 hours, he said, his architectural problem-solving brain kicking into high gear. That's 96 hours to find a space, coordinate vendors, and make arrangements. It's tight, but not impossible. Especially not for someone with your skills and connections. What skills and connections? I asked helplessly. I build software. I don't have a secret network of wedding venues just waiting for my call. Daniel pulled the car over into a parking lot and turned to face me. Elena, you've spent the last 6 years building the most sophisticated event management systems in the industry. You've worked with hundreds of venues, thousands of vendors, coordinated events for Fortune 500 companies. You might not realize it, but you have access to resources and knowledge that most people can't even imagine. Your mother was right about one thing. You are resourceful and capable. Let's prove it. Something in his words sparked a shift in my thinking. He was right that I'd spent years immersed in the event industry, even if my role was technical rather than operational. I'd built software that managed vendor relationships, coordinated logistics, handled crisis situations. I'd consulted with event planners facing seemingly impossible challenges and helped them find solutions through better systems and processes. Maybe, just maybe, I could apply that knowledge to my own crisis. I need my laptop, I said suddenly. And I need to make some phone calls. If we're going to do this, we need to start immediately. Daniel grinned, relieved to see me shifting from defeated to determined. That's my girl. Where to first? Your parents' restaurant, I said, an idea beginning to form. They have event space, and your mom has been dying to cater our wedding. Maybe we start there and build out from what we already have. As Daniel drove toward New Jersey, I opened my laptop and began making a list of everyone in my professional network who might be able to help. Event coordinators I'd worked with on software implementations, venue managers who'd given me tours while evaluating our systems, vendors I'd helped solve technical problems for over the years. I'd spent 6 years building relationships in this industry, even if I'd never thought of leveraging them for my own benefit. Now was the time to call in every favor, use every connection, and prove that I could create something beautiful out of the disaster my family had handed me. My phone rang, and I saw it was Adrian Cho, one of the senior event planners I'd worked with on a major corporate conference last year. We'd become friendly during the months-long project, grabbing coffee occasionally to discuss event technology trends. I hadn't planned to call her yet, still formulating my strategy, but I answered anyway. Elena, I just heard through the industry grapevine that you had a venue fall through for your wedding this weekend, Adrian said without preamble. Is it true? I was startled by how quickly information traveled in the event industry, then remembered that my venue change would have affected multiple vendors who all talked to each other. Yeah, it's true. Family situation, very complicated. I'm currently trying to figure out plan B with about 90 hours to spare. I might be able to help, Adrienne said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I owe you big time for saving our conference after that registration system crashed. Let me make some calls. Over the next 72 hours, I learned what it truly meant to leverage professional relationships and technical expertise under impossible pressure. Adrienne connected me with a boutique hotel in Hartford that had just had a wedding cancellation due to the bride getting cold feet. The venue was smaller than Rosewood Manor but charming, with a rooftop garden that overlooked the city skyline. The cancellation had happened so recently that they hadn't even advertised the opening, and they were willing to work with us at a significantly reduced rate since it was such short notice. Daniel and I drove there immediately, signed the contract within an hour, and suddenly we had a venue again. The vendor coordination was more complex but not insurmountable. I reached out to each contracted vendor individually, explaining the situation with professional directness. The caterer was flexible, agreeing to work with the new venue's kitchen facilities with only minor menu adjustments. The florist was enthusiastic about the rooftop garden setting, saying it would actually showcase her wildflower arrangements better than the formal ballroom would have. The photographer had worked at this venue before and was relieved we'd found somewhere he knew. The DJ was the only holdout, citing conflicts with the new location's sound restrictions, but Daniel's cousin knew a musician who assembled a small band within 24 hours. Each piece fell into place not perfectly, but adequately, building towards something that started to resemble an actual wedding. Daniel's family mobilized with the kind of collective efficiency that comes from genuinely caring about someone's happiness. His mother coordinated with the hotel's catering team to incorporate family recipes into the menu. His father and brothers helped transport decorations and set up the rooftop space. His sisters created an emergency guest communication plan, calling every single person on our list to inform them of the venue change, hotel recommendations, and updated timeline. They treated my crisis as their own family emergency, something to be solved through coordinated effort and unconditional support. The contrast to my own family's response was stark and painful, but also clarifying. My parents called twice during those frantic days. The first time was my father, his voice awkward with an apology he couldn't quite articulate. He offered to contribute financially toward the new venue, a gesture I suspected came from guilt rather than my mother's approval. I declined, explaining that we'd managed to work within our existing budget and preferred to handle this ourselves. The second call was my mother, informing me that she expected Daniel and me to still attend Isabelle's wedding in October, as if taking my venue and the subsequent chaos was a minor family disagreement rather than a fundamental betrayal. I told her I'd think about it and ended the call before saying something irreparable. Isabelle never called at all, though she sent several texts oscillating between apologetic and defensive, each message revealing more clearly that she'd never seriously considered refusing the venue or advocating for me. In her worldview, shaped by years of being the favored daughter, it was natural that she'd receive whatever she wanted, and equally natural that I'd accommodate that reality. The fact that this particular accommodation destroyed my wedding plans was unfortunate but not really her responsibility. I stopped responding to her messages after the third one, having nothing left to say that wouldn't permanently sever what remained of our relationship. The morning of my wedding arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect September day that made everything seem possible. I woke up in the hotel where Daniel and I had deliberately stayed in separate rooms for tradition's sake, surrounded by his sisters who'd appointed themselves my bridal attendants when my own family remained conspicuously absent. They helped me dress, style my hair, apply makeup, treating the morning with the reverence and joy that should have come from my own mother and sister. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a bride who'd been forged through crisis rather than simply prepared through planning, and there was something powerful in that reflection. The rooftop ceremony was intimate and beautiful in ways Rosewood Manor's formal grandeur could never have achieved. Our 150 guests filled the space with warmth and celebration, every person present because they genuinely wanted to witness our union rather than fulfill a social obligation. Daniel's vows made me cry, speaking about resilience and partnership and building something stronger than the obstacles we'd faced. My own vows acknowledged that marriage meant choosing your family rather than simply accepting the one you were born into. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's from architecture school, wove our story into the ceremony with humor and heart, never explicitly mentioning the venue disaster but acknowledging that we'd overcome significant challenges to reach this moment. The reception that followed was joyful and authentic, filled with toasts that celebrated our relationship rather than maintaining social appearances. Daniel's mother had outdone herself with food that reflected both our family's cultures, creating a menu that told the story of two people from different backgrounds building something new together. The wildflower arrangements looked stunning against the urban skyline backdrop, and the small band Daniel's cousin had assembled played with energy that made everyone dance. It wasn't the wedding I'd originally planned, but it was somehow more meaningful, stripped of pretense and filled with people who actually cared about us. My parents didn't attend, a decision my mother conveyed through a brief text message citing scheduling conflicts and the uncomfortable situation. I suspected they were avoiding the judgment of guests who would inevitably ask about the venue change and the family dynamics that precipitated it. Their absence hurt less than I'd expected, perhaps because I'd spent the past several days surrounded by Daniel's family and realizing that parental love wasn't supposed to be conditional on convenience or social calculation. Isabelle also didn't come, sending an elaborate flower arrangement with a card expressing regrets about travel complications. The flowers were beautiful and unwanted, a symbolic gesture that required no personal investment or accountability. The wedding made local news not because of any disaster but because an industry journalist who attended as a guest wrote a piece about how event technology expertise had saved a wedding from catastrophic venue failure. The article focused on my professional background, my rapid problem solving under pressure, and how technical knowledge translated into practical crisis management. It mentioned my role at TechFlow Solutions and included quotes from vendors praising my coordination skills and grace under impossible circumstances. The piece was picked up by several event industry publications, and suddenly I was being contacted for interviews about disaster recovery planning and the intersection of technology and event management. The publicity caught my company's attention in unexpected ways. My CEO called personally to congratulate me on the wedding and the positive press, then surprised me by asking if I'd be interested in developing a new division focused on emergency event coordination powered by our existing technology platforms. It was an opportunity I'd never considered but realized I was uniquely qualified for, having just lived through the exact scenario we'd be helping other people navigate. The position came with a significant promotion, increased salary, and the chance to build something from the ground up. I accepted immediately, recognizing that my family's betrayal had inadvertently launched my career in a new direction. 3 months later, as Daniel and I settled into married life and I built out the new emergency coordination division, Isabelle's wedding at Rosewood Manor took place with all the elaborate pageantry my mother had envisioned. I saw photos on social media, carefully curated images of formal elegance and social prominence that looked beautiful and utterly soulless. The 300 guests, the designer gown, the orchestra, the 5-tier cake, everything screamed expensive perfection but revealed nothing about the actual people getting married. My mother texted me several pictures with captions about how spectacular the event was, seemingly oblivious to how those messages landed after everything that had happened. I never responded to those texts or to the subsequent invitations to family holidays that arrived as if nothing fundamental had changed between us. Daniel and I spent Thanksgiving with his family, Christmas with friends we'd made together, and began building traditions that reflected our values rather than inherited obligations. My parents sent gifts and cards, performative gestures that acknowledged our existence without requiring actual relationship or accountability. Isabelle occasionally reached out with surface-level questions about my life, maintaining the pretense of sisterhood without acknowledging the destruction that had occurred between us. The distance from my family of origin became comfortable rather than painful, a healthy boundary that protected my peace and prioritized relationships built on mutual respect. I poured energy into work that fulfilled me, into marriage with someone who genuinely partnered with me, into friendships with people who celebrated my successes rather than diminishing them. The emergency coordination division I built became nationally recognized, and I found satisfaction in helping other people navigate disasters that threatened their important events, turning my own traumatic experience into expertise that served others. Years later, when my parents finally acknowledged that their treatment of me had been problematic, their apology came too late and without sufficient understanding of what they'd actually done. They wanted reconciliation on their terms, relationship without consequences, forgiveness that required no changed behavior. I declined politely but firmly, explaining that some betrayals couldn't be undone simply by admitting they'd occurred. My life had moved forward without them, and I discovered that family could be chosen, built, and nurtured with people who valued you consistently rather than conditionally. The wedding venue disaster had revealed truths I might have spent decades avoiding, forcing confrontation with family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. In destroying what should have been a joyful milestone, my parents had inadvertently freed me from seeking their approval, from measuring my worth against their narrow definitions of success, from participating in a family system that had never truly valued who I was. The price of that freedom had been high, but the life I built afterward, with Daniel and his family and the community we created together, proved worth every difficult moment of that transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.